In the early 20th century, an unusual and catastrophic event struck the city of Boston, Massachusetts. It wasn't an earthquake or fire, but an industrial disaster that flooded the streets with a sticky, thick substance, molasses. This event became infamously known as the Boston Molasses Disaster or the Great Molasses Flood. It's a tragic yet bizarre chapter in American history, and its effects were devastating. Background: the event took place on January 15, 1919, in the North End neighborhood of Boston. At that time, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company operated a massive steel storage tank filled with about 2.3 million gallons of molasses. Molasses was an essential ingredient in producing alcohol and other goods, and this particular storage tank was a key supply hub for the alcohol industry, especially during the time of World War I. It was used to ferment molasses into industrial alcohol for producing munitions and other wartime supplies. This giant tank was built in 1915, and it towered 50 feet tall and had a diameter of 90 feet. From the moment it was built, locals noticed something peculiar. The tank leaked constantly, and molasses oozed from the seams of the tank, so much so that children would often gather with pails to collect the dripping molasses. Despite the obvious structural issues, little was done to repair the leaks, as the company's primary focus was on profits and efficiency. The disaster strikes. On the day of January 15, 1919, it was an unseasonably warm day in Boston. The temperature had risen rapidly, and the warmer weather caused the molasses inside the tank to expand. At around 12:30 p.m., with little warning, the tank ruptured. Witnesses described hearing a loud roar followed by the sound of metal tearing apart. What followed was a disaster of unimaginable scale. The entire contents of the tank, all 2.3 million gallons of molasses, surged out in a massive wave. The wave was reportedly 25 feet high and moved at a speed of 35 miles per hour, sweeping through the streets with overwhelming force. Molasses, which is typically slow-moving and thick, turned into a fast-moving flood because of the pressure it was under inside the tank. It destroyed everything in its path. Buildings were knocked off their foundations, and steel girders from an elevated railway were bent and twisted. The flood was so powerful that a truck weighing several tons was picked up and hurled into the Boston harbor. Streets were flooded, and anyone who was unlucky enough to be caught in the wave was either crushed, suffocated, or drowned in the sticky syrup. The human toll. The human toll of the disaster was severe. A total of 21 people lost their lives, and over 150 others were injured. Many of the victims were workers in the nearby area, others were passers-by, and several were firefighters stationed at a nearby firehouse, which was completely destroyed by the wave. Rescue efforts were extremely challenging. The molasses quickly began to harden in the cold weather, making it difficult for first responders to move through the affected area. Rescue workers, police officers, and civilians worked tirelessly for days to search for survivors and recover the dead. Horses were stuck in the thick substance and had to be shot to relieve their suffering. The cleanup was incredibly difficult as the molasses stuck to everything it touched, leaving a lasting mark on the city. Legal consequences. In the aftermath of the disaster, investigations into the cause of the tank's failure began immediately. The U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company initially tried to blame anarchists, suggesting that the tank had been sabotaged. However, it soon became clear that poor construction and a lack of maintenance were the primary causes of the disaster. It was discovered that the tank had been poorly designed, with insufficient steel thickness and substandard rivets used to hold it together. The company had also failed to perform proper safety checks. As a result, a massive lawsuit was filed by the families of the victims and by the city of Boston. The trial lasted for several years, and in 1925, the company was found liable for the disaster. They were ordered to pay over $600,000 in damages, which is equivalent to roughly $9 million in today's currency. This lawsuit became one of the earliest cases of corporate responsibility for industrial disasters in the United States and led to increased regulations and safety standards in the construction of industrial storage facilities. The aftermath and legacy. The Boston Molasses Disaster left a lasting impact on the North End neighborhood and the city of Boston as a whole. For years after the event, the smell of molasses lingered in the area, and it's said that on hot summer days, the scent can still be detected even today. The site where the tank once stood is now a playground, but the memory of the disaster has not been forgotten. The disaster also had a significant influence on safety regulations in the U.S. It highlighted the dangers of unchecked industrial expansion and the need for stricter oversight. Today, Engineers and architects use lessons learned from the Boston Molasses disaster to ensure that large industrial tanks and similar structures are built with safety in mind, to prevent tragedies like this from happening again. Conclusion: the Boston Molasses disaster may seem like a bizarre and almost unbelievable event, but it stands as a sobering reminder of the importance of proper safety measures and corporate responsibility. It was a tragedy that claimed lives, destroyed property, and left a lasting stain on the history of Boston. Through this disaster, valuable lessons were learned, and improvements were made that have saved countless lives since then. This strange yet tragic event reminds us that even in modern times, sometimes the most unexpected things can lead to disaster.